Air India's former Director for Operations, Captain Arvind Kathpalia, who was suspended earlier this month for failing to clear a pre-flight alcohol test, has now been given the position of Executive Director in the airlines. The airline had taken him off flying duties while aviation regulator DGCA had suspended his flying license. My colleague Tanima Biswas joining me from the Mumbai newsroom. Tanima, let's get it clear first. He was promoted from the position of Executive Director to the position of Director, and now essentially he's been demoted and he's brought one position down. But his flying license remains suspended and he cannot fly for the next 3 years. Am I correct?
That's right. The suspension which had in fact been made, the fact that he had failed a pre-flight alcohol test earlier in the month, and also DGCA had taken note of the situation and had suspended his flying license. Air India had also taken him off the flying roster. So those actions still remain. It's just that he has now been given the post of Executive Director. But what we are also hearing from our sources in Air India is that he's not going to head a department. He's not, his powers and responsibilities in a way have been pared down. Of course, he is not on flying duty for the moment, so those actions are still there. It's just that Air India has of course made it clear that they have Arvind Kathpalia had been associated with them for quite some time. He had in fact been associated with the airlines for since the 1980s, and he had been working with them for quite some time. Remember, he had also held a very important position of Director of Operations prior to failing that pre-flight alcohol test. So he has been made the Executive Director, but what the airlines is also saying that it's not that he has been given a lot of powers and responsibilities.
Yes, but even so, Tanima, I mean, what is the protocol like? If somebody fails a breath analyzer test, it's a serious offense, isn't it? Can that person still hold a position of power? Because as we can imagine, a Director of Operations in Air India, he was in that particular position when he failed this test. Clearly, he is somebody who probably is responsible for enforcing rules, and he was found flouting them.
That's right. So as per the directives and the guidance, the guidelines rather, that Air India follows, anybody who fails a pre-flight alcohol test twice has to be suspended for 3 years. That has in fact been done in terms of him not flying anymore for the next 3 years. That is what we are given to understand. And as I mentioned, that the DGCA had also taken note of this serious offence of failing a pre-flight alcohol test and have suspended his flying license. But in terms of being he had never actually been sacked from Air India. He was still part of the airlines, and he was holding a position over there earlier of importance from where he was removed as the Director of Operations.
Yes.
So essentially what the airlines is saying is that they cannot sack him. They have given him a position, but at the same time essentially saying that because of these grave offence, which he had not only been found guilty of once but twice in 2 years, they have in fact pared him his responsibilities down and given him a post of Executive Director.
Okay, Kapil Kirk, aviation expert, joining us. Mr. Kirk, can somebody who has flouted a rule in an airline can actually hold an executive position? Because this is surprising. The ministry is telling us, well, we have suspended his flying license for 3 years. We have demoted him from the position of Director to Executive Director, and that's all the penalty that he deserves.
Well, Afrida, you put it so well. I can only add a very clear case of total disregard to accountability, disregard to public opinion, disregard to professional norms of how we must do aviation in India. I must have said on your channel at least a dozen times that our growth rate is so explosive. We are just waiting for an incident to take place. We've been waiting for this for years. That's my first point. My second point is this gentleman has no business. There is something called optics.
Yes.
There is something called perceptions. How do the public view it? We may have the best of government, but if the government is seen to be horrible, the government is seen to be irresponsible, the government is seen to be favoring their favorite boys of Air India and utter disregard for safety norms, optics, national opinion of Air India, what can a mere Air Marshal retired say to you on this occasion?
Yes.
This is the sad part of India, and I don't think we will overcome it. We have to live with it. This is unfortunately the truth. With what credibility with this gentleman whom every single pilot says this This is a drunkard.
Absolutely, and this kind of a thing, sir.
200 people.
Yes, this kind of a thing will never work in a private airline, isn't it? Is it because this is a government-run airline that, you know, such concessions are given that he cannot be moved out, he cannot be removed? And I take your point about how you said that this is a huge disregard for safety norms. So that is certainly not acceptable. You have a person in a position of power within the airline who has himself flouted rules. It just doesn't add up. I also have Vipul Saxena, aviation expert. Yes, Mr. Saxena, your views on this, please.
See, I would take little more time to explain the whole situation in totality. Firstly, that somebody on top, sitting as a godfather, saving this person from beginning. Now, this breath analyzer has been introduced in civil aviation very recently, and in that short period only, he's been caught twice.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
So that shows that despite that, he has disregard for all these norms. That shows that all throughout the career, I would assume that all throughout his career, he has been flying drunk. This is what any normal person should assume this. Okay. And such person sitting on such a top position has got no regard for the public opinion, no regard for the norms, the discipline, the flight safety. As a director on board of Air India, as a director of operations, I mean, I don't know what were the criteria Air India, DGCA, matched with this person, making him to such a big responsible position. In fact, he has also been chief of flight inspectorate in DGCA for 2 years on deputation.
Right.
So, I feel the action which Air India has taken, it is only a symbolic action, and which would have happened naturally because he has been removed from the board. So obviously, he has been given some position. So when a person is removed from the board, obviously he'll get a minimum executive director position, which is no punishment at all.
Which is no punishment at all. That's a pretty serious. That's a pretty serious statement there, Mr. Vipul Saxena and Air Marshal Kapil Kak. Thanks for joining us. And both gentlemen actually agrees on this point that Air India has not taken this offence seriously enough. Is Mr. Arvind Kathpalia beyond reproach? Is he above rules and regulations? That's a question we must ask. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen.